Welcome, sales professionals, to List and Sell Online. Obviously, the whole show is brought to you by Sales Trainer. And just a reminder, I know this becomes a bit monotonous for those of you that join every week, but always have to remind you that what we're doing here is focused on traction. So we run the assumption that you do have inroads, that you do have seed listings, you're operating those listings, and always serving as a constant reminder to first and foremost focus in and around regeneration of listings. So that is essentially taking one listing, turning into two, those two into four, and literally building market share. You are on the path where you want to get to momentum, where you have a 30% optimal market share. Now, I can't help but make some reference to this because I have spoken to a lot of salespeople that have actually had a degree of success in and around running their prospecting regimes, but invariably, we get that little bit of a scattergun approach. So any opportunity that comes our way, nothing wrong with this, but of course you want to capitalize on it if it's anywhere within the service area that you are focused upon. But if you do that, you take that scattergun approach, it's not necessarily the appropriate position of strength. So as a consequence of that, I believe that you're quite often letting yourself in for a little more work than you could take. Not that it's work if you're listing properties, but I'm sure you can understand so much more powerful if you've got a definitive geographic area and you are focused on resolved on a 30% market share across roughly, the aim should be somewhere around 5,000 houses. Why? Well, if we know for a fact that at capacity, or the capacity it can yield, is approximately 20 sales per thousand, if you can eventually build that market area that you're chasing up to around 1,000, you've got a real shot at 100 sales. Get those 100 sales to the lucrative position where you are commanding the most attractive fee from your perspective in the area, and doing that successfully. And I pretty much reckon it's all smooth sailing from there. And again, I know some of you who might have been on here for years, the reminder was served to me this week when I had several people who've taken what they've wanted from Sales Trainer, gone off into the wilderness, and now, because markets are changing somewhat, they're coming back and they're saying they're getting whacked. One guy said to me in particular, his first statement was, the competition has caught up. And I said, well, nah, that's not the case. There's no way, because the people that you're talking about, I know that for a fact they haven't been and seen what we have on offer. It might just be a case that you haven't extended that contrasted point of difference. And this sets up pretty good for what we're going to talk about today, because it's this session is number 15. We want to talk today, or the headline around that is pampering, making that more specific. I want to talk about engagement. So over the last few weeks, we've spent a lot of time talking about number one, first and foremost, and this hasn't changed in and around November. You hopefully have built your APS, your active property seller list, to 25 or better. If you've done this successfully, then you have, working a 5-day week, at least 5 parties, 5 active property sellers you can speak to and engage. And we'll talk about that engagement in just a moment. And hopefully you have gone down the path of the pre-list, that you are indeed, that you've sent them the property sellers research guide. Anyone that's on here that's listening to this and saying that I want a property sellers research guide, I need to have one. We've been working on that all this week. Those of you that already have the property sellers research guide, you'll be delighted to know that We'll soon be updating that as part of Prospector 4 and making it more relevant to the current market and everything that sits in and around that. But essentially, it doesn't change, and don't panic. It doesn't mean that what you have doesn't work. It does. If you have sent the property sellers research guide out there, that's contrasting your point of difference. If you are SMSing the messages, all of this is good passive contact. The preliminary comparative market analysis, I'm not going to go into that today, but we've obviously covered that off several occasions over previous weeks. You've given or shown them the 2View platform. You've gone down and you've got your newsletter, your market roundup going out. Accolades are definitely in front of them, and you are really realizing the relevance and absolute importance of these in actually establishing your product and your value proposition, for that matter, with prospective sellers, via your recommendations and your testimonials. And we will, as promised, next week or the week after, I'll start to talk more and really center around the case studies. This is definitely a new component sat inside Prospector 4 that's coming to you from Property Marketer, and sending out your specific buyers. Now, if we're looking at this from the perspective of the active property seller, the passive contact is such that there is plenty of engagement. You are in touch with them. You're not necessarily talking directly to them. This prevents them from feeling like there's a bit of a badgering. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing your very best to know that if and when they're ready, you're there and you're at the ready too. But we also need to stimulate good, solid engagement. So this has been the passive contact. Yes, it is pampering them, for want of a better word. It's giving them good information. It's setting up a framework where you're giving advice instead of price. But now we want to focus very strongly and very succinctly on developing good conversations. And what I will say, even though I will probably follow on for this, over the next couple of months, is that basically your performance moving forward, especially in this particular climate, you can almost readily evaluate how good that performance is based on the number of good, solid conversations you have every day. So often I see salespeople, especially in the prospecting regime, they look at the number of dial outs as numbers of contacts or something, and they count them. And I mean, I couldn't be bothered. I mean, to me, if I don't connect with someone, that counts as zip, nothing. In the same manner, I've had people say to me, when I'm running prospecting regimes, should I leave a message on a phone, on a message bank, or, an answering machine in the old days? And I just say, no. You're not royalty, and prospecting, you seemingly want to connect with them. You want something. Leaving a message and expecting someone to call you back is like pie in the sky stuff. And if you're just trying to demonstrate that you're out there doing something or working or connecting, that's pie in the sky stuff as well. We want to get on to good, solid engagement. Now, before I jump into that, I just want to illustrate another very important point from most of this weekend and from the latter part of this afternoon. If you don't have your active property seller list to where it ought to be, please tune in to Property Careers, the YouTube channel Property Careers. If you have any trouble finding that, just shoot me an email, Mark with a K at salestrainer.com.au, and I'll send you the address of that particular channel on YouTube. But we've got a plethora of information in there about building your APS list that focuses centrically, no doubt, on creating foothold, but also goes on to talk about traction, working over the SEL, and lots of things you should be doing and saying to successfully identify an oversupply of opportunities, namely that 25 plus active property sellers. That needs to be your first port of call. If you don't have 25 that you're talking to right now, you've got to work with the ones you've got, but just simultaneously, you've got to be obsessed with building that list. Don't do it now. And I can almost assure you that you will go to the break and come back at a stalled start in the new year. You have to start thinking, basically now your mind is about completing those that sit in the before Christmas. So again, following on from last week, I do hope that you've run through that qualify in and around motive, and you've made some decisions on those sellers on your APS list that are going to be selling this side of Christmas, that is before, and those that are going to be sitting on the after Christmas, and how we approach them, not just in how we space out the pre-list passive contacts. So of course, those after Christmas, you'll spread those out more evenly. It wouldn't be urgent to move into, for example, the comparative market analysis. Now I might even leave it till, very close, early December, which is in December, of course, or maybe even the new year, depending upon what I'm hearing back from those people. But those this side, I would be up to, they would have gotten that by now, certainly. They would have the property sellers research guide. They'd definitely be on my SMS list. And I'd most likely now be inviting them to attend open for inspections and hoping that I'm getting that invitation to get down there and talk to them about listing the property. Now, I alluded to some of the stuff that sits in and around this right now. I'll just recap to make that perfectly clear, very clear. Jump on, if your APS list is not up, over the course of this weekend and listen to all the previous recordings as best you can in and around Property Careers Prospector School. If your list is down and you're in single figures or otherwise, week after next, we do have Property Careers Prospector 4 School online. So the official release of Prospector 4 will not be until the new year, but those that jump into Prospector School will be seeing it firsthand and have the advantage of all of the tools that we have in and around prospecting to build your APS list, to get you to have significant penetration inside a definitive market of your choosing. If, of course, you got that 25, well, the business for you right now is first and foremost focusing on those before Christmas. As these are coming to market, as we're working around that, absolute obsession with leverage. So making sure that you're doing things that are causing one listing to turn into the identification of two more sellers, putting them onto your APS list and engaging that same process as we look to build market share. All right, let's have a quick look at the conversations that we need to be having with sellers. And there's lots of scenarios that are flagging around out there. Probably the most notable one is, especially in this current climate, and especially with the danger of November, that a lot of people are saying, oh, look, I can't, or I haven't been able to find something to buy yet. And until such time as I do, I'm not really prepared to put my property on the market. Well, this is just a leading statement. And certainly you can't be jumping on there once you've identified someone and starting to try and offer advice that could easily come across in a belligerent manner, where you start saying things like, what makes you, why do you want to own two properties at the same time? Why on earth would you be buying something without having sold, and sounding very contemptuous? Don't get frustrated. We know, I know, you know, that their game plan is flawed, because my favorite line, my favorite tickler, if you like, to initiate good engagement and conversation around this incumbent, impendent, inevitable move, is to say, well, what if you do find something? And they'll say, what do you mean? I said, well, let's imagine that, I know this week you haven't, and you're obviously out there hunting. What happens if you do find something? Now they say, I'll buy it. And then what? Well, then I'll sell it. Yeah, but is it not fair for me to say, irrespective, and I know you're delighted, I know that you've actually found the property that you want to buy, but now, is it also fair for me to say, I know that you can hang on to it for a sustained period of time, that you actually have to sell it at some stage? They go, yeah. And given that you're now on the timeline, that the timer is now turned on, does this not also mean that you are suffering or feeling a bit of pressure around this? And that pressure could invariably lead to stress. Well, what do you mean? What happens if you get it on and all of a sudden the offers that you're getting, they're there just the way you anticipated, but those offers are less than you had hoped for. And you are, for all intensive purposes, somewhat committed on the other end. Now, given that the luxury of time has been taken away, how are you feeling? And they look at me and they then look at me or talking to me on the phone. This has got to elicit some sort of conversation. And of course, that conversation can grow from there. I say, why would you put yourself into that position unnecessarily when you don't have to? Well, what do you mean? And this allows me to start extending. One of my favorite explanations of what people sometimes do without thinking about it is to take what I refer to as a consultative approach. All I'm trying to do is spark conversation and then hypothetically allow them to understand the paths they could be taking. Now, I'm very careful around this, and before any of you think it's just for the sake of saying something, no, it's very calculated. What I am doing and saying and engaging them in conversation is leading them somewhere. So this requires, as is atypical, the use of rhetorical questions. I'm going to be using leading questions that have definitive conclusions. And the fundamental basis of this is to start with getting people to understand that listing is not selling. This is a common misconception, that somebody thinks by virtue of the fact that they've agreed to list the property, that there is some obligation to sell it. Now, I say to them, the way I explain it, I say, look, there's actually two agreements that you'll be signing during the life, insofar as I'm concerned, of your transaction. The first is that you need to sign an agency agreement. Now, what's not understood about this by no means says or dictates that you are obligated to sell the property. All this does is it means that we are allowed to now market the property. Now, this can be done in a very aggressive fashion, where we are advertising the property strongly. We are putting out there good marketing in anticipation of getting someone straight away. Now, based on what you've said, if you found something, we would move to that straight away. But it can also mean that we have it at the ready. We have the marketing ready should the need arise. And we just do have it available, and we are already courting and talking to buyers. And there are a number of benefits associated with this for you. First and foremost, it is like, because the question that I have for you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is this: what if you do find something? They say, well, we're going to buy it. And I say, yeah, okay, but if you buy it, does this not mean that you are now in the position where at some stage, at least, you're most likely going to own two properties at the same time? And they say, yeah. And I say, look, no, I'm not saying that may or may not happen, but why would you willingly put yourself into a position where this has to happen? What do you mean? Well, has anyone sat you down and shown you the safest and most practical way to go about the buying and selling of real estate that is representative of the least amount of financial risk? They say, okay, no, well, please explain. So from here, and I'll just put this up on the screen because it's the easiest way to explain it to you, is I just say, look, there are 4 steps to actually selling your property. The first is, and look, you can do this either way. I mean, I can say to them, at the moment, you're saying that you need to buy the house. So I might just write the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll say, is it fair for me to say that you really don't want to do anything, and you certainly don't want to sell your house until such time as you found something to buy? They go, yeah. So figuratively speaking, you want to know that you have bought something before you're willing to entertain the idea of selling. They go, yes. Yeah. So oddly enough, those two factors, buying a new home and selling this house, are the last part, first half and second half of the fourth step. And I just write that down. I write buy home, sell house. Before any of these, either of these can actually happen, what do you have to do? Now, based on the scenario we're using right now, they will most likely say we have to find a house. We have to find something to buy. And I say, well, that's funny. That's the second step. Now, already you're saying that the first step that you want to take is to buy the home so that you can sell the house. That's the fourth step. And now you're saying you want to find a house. That's the second step. Can you see you've got everything out of whack? And by getting it out of whack, you are possibly, not for sure, but quite possibly subjecting yourself to unnecessary stress and worry. Well, what do you mean? All right. What do you got to do before any of those can happen? Before you, even if you do find a house, what do you now need to have happen? And they don't think about it. And so I might prompt them and I'll say, look, I'm sure you've got a budget. I'm sure you've said that we are looking, what we are going to move to is going to cost X amount of dollars in an estimation. And to make that move successful, we need to sell our property for X amount. They go, yeah. So I call that matching the prices, making sure that my buyout price is, I guess, consistent with what I have planned for with my sellout price. They go, yeah. So that's the third step. Now, if you go ahead, can you see, if you go ahead and buy the home, you find it and you buy it, can you now see that the opportunity for you to match the prices is rapidly diminishing? And especially if it so happens to be the case that when we get yours to market, that the price that we are able to obtain at market, and just a reminder, this is why it's so very, very important that you are completely conversant with discussing the difference between market value and comparative value. But is it not fair for me to say that you have now robbed yourself the opportunity to match the prices? And if it comes in at less, this now presents an unnecessarily stressful situation for you, because not only do you have to sell it, you have to sell it in terms of the budget that you have set short. So you're going to end up short. And you can't tell me that this doesn't add up to a disappointing experience and it becomes relatively stressful. You see, this is what you actually do. So if you actually buy ahead of selling, whether you like it or not, one of the things that you are robbing yourself of is time. You now actually become time poor. Why? Because you don't have the luxury of time, so you can't sit back and wait. So invariably, if you've already bought and a buyer comes along and they actually come up with a number that's starting to make sense or close, you may well run with it. So again, you're selling yourself short. There's never a truer thing said, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. The time is money. And in this case, the more time you have, the more opportunity you have to vie for a better outcome in the sale of your property. So I remind you again that listing is not selling. See, all you have to understand is if you list the property for sale, we go ahead and find a buyer. Now, it may happen that you do find a house ahead of time, but in the case that you do, yeah, you haven't voluntarily put yourself in this position. We've walked into it. And given that you're actually already have yours on the market, we're at the ready and we can move in a liquid fashion around it. Let me propose another case to you. What if you do find something and at the same time, so too do two other buyers? The difference, of course, is that they've gotten their properties on the market. They have buyers and they're at the ready. So for a start, their offer is going to be looked at more favorably because they can perform immediately. Do you see my point? And what I'm saying is it's not putting your property on the market is just not necessary. I say the risk that you're taking versus the return doesn't kind of make sense. I know that you've said that the bank is quite comfortable with the idea of giving you the money in a bridging arrangement to do it. But let's have a look at the motivation of the bank. Why would they say yes? What do they sell? They sell the use of money that they want back. And when it's a bridging loan, it is at a much higher interest rate. So they make a lot more money out of it. So of course, their position is to encourage you to do it. But as I've always said, bankers are interesting. You know, they hand you their umbrella while the sun is shining and they want it back when it starts to rain. And when it starts to rain and you're in that stressful situation, I don't think they're going to be quite as understanding about getting that money back. You don't want to put yourself into that financial vice for no particular reason. And that's that this timing restriction is important. But the moment you rob yourself of time, you're in a spot of bother. So I would rather have the luxury of time being, as the song goes, on our side so that we are utilizing this to our advantage. I do need to explain to you that I'm okay with no. I'm sure you're looking at this 4-step plan and saying to yourself, well, what if, what if we do find something, yeah, and sorry, we don't, sorry. What if you do find a buyer, you've got the buyer there ready to go, and we're not ready to go, and you're concerned about turning the buyer down? But that's my job. I can say simply to the buyer, you'll either have to wait until they're ready to go, or we'll just have to say no to your offer. Either way, you still win, because if it takes you some more time until you find that second buyer, well, that first buyer wasn't going to be there anyway. I wouldn't worry too much about these things that you're getting concerned about, and stop trying to do my job. It's my job to coordinate all of the things that sit around that. It's your job, yeah, to just make decisions as the opportunities arise and as they're presented to you. Sorry, I've just lost my. All right. So I just say to them, if it comes up to the point, you know, you've found a buyer, you found a house, and you can't match the numbers, again, I'm okay with no, just saying no to each party as it works. But can you see that in this situation, you are in control? Hypothetically, let me take it one step further. What happens if you do commit? You find something and you commit to it, and you liked it, but it would have been nice if you bought a better house. Then we get yours on the market and the result is actually a lot better than you'd hoped for. So much so that you say, wow, if I had known that I was going to get this level for my property, we could have bought a better one. But you can't now because you're already committed to the other. Can you see the risk of buying before selling is not worth the return that it gives? It's an unnecessary risk. At least the way that I'm explaining it to you, the risk is lessened, less stressful, less worry, easier to control. And these are things that we need to focus on in building the conversation with every seller. Utilize the questions, engage the conversation, stay away from the prediction of price or anything associated with that. If you understand market value, and I say this over and over and over again to sellers, it doesn't really matter what I think. I'm not out there looking to buy. Yes, there is comparable value. It's just a subjective opinion. It holds no weight in the marketplace itself because the market has different forces at large that completely override comparisons. I mean, despite anything a real estate agent might say to you, no two properties are the same to a buyer. If a buyer becomes interested in one, and I have seen the instance where they're looking at one property, comparing it to another, and for all intensive purposes, to an outside observer, to me as an estate agent, I can't see the difference. I've had properties in the similar location, a street apart, built by the same builder, same color scheme, same everything, yet the buyer is totally adamant that this one is way better and sees more value in it. And as I've often said, the quickest way to sell something to someone is to take it from them. So if you look at this situation that we're talking about, if the sellers get their properties on the market without having obligated themselves, having bought, they're in the box office. They're in a position to then take it away. All right, there's more stories where this comes from. Be more than happy if you do need help with engagement, if you do need to look at expanding and what you need to do to make sure that you're engaging all those active property sellers. And it's important that you do, because this allows you to create a representation of value, which relieves all of the stress when it comes to them investing in marketing, when it comes to them investing in you as an estate agent and being quite compliant with the fee percentage that you want to set to sell the property. My name's Mark Dwyer. You can reach me at mark@salestrainer.com.au, or you can telephone me on +61 410 592 165. And please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is the Mark Dwyer channel, and take a look at all the past representations and I guess sessions that we've actually got recorded for you. See you next week. Hope you're enjoying December.